Welcome to Glass in Session. I'm your host, Val, and I thank you for clicking play, for subscribing, and supporting this show. A little disclaimer, I had a ridiculous software failure this week. That's right, and lost many hours of work on this show. So while I was getting ready to record, I had to rewrite nearly half of the show again. But by attacking it late, I was able to pull up all my old sources, which also disappeared, and I actually got to include a few more current sources. So I guess the rose comes with the thorns this time. I hope you enjoyed the last episode that took us to the vineyards of Poland, and I thank you all for giving the episode on Lebanon wine earlier in May so much love, especially as Lebanon has unfortunately been back in the news. Albania has also been back in the news, but it's been on my editorial calendar for a while, so let's give it some vineyard love as well, shall we? First, let's find it on a map. Albania, or the Republic of Albania, is a small country on the western edge of the Balkans in southeastern Europe. To get a better idea, think of Italy and the heel of that boot. If the boot were to kick back across the Adriatic, it would hit Albania. From the western shores of the Adriatic, we have clockwise from the sea its bordering nations, Montenegro and Kosovo to the northwest and northeast, respectively. North Macedonia is to the east. Greece is to the southeast, all the way south and back to the Adriatic. The Greek island of Corfu sits just west of Albania's southern border in the Ionian Sea. It's a small country, about 27,398 square kilometers, or under 11,000 square miles of land between Haiti and Burundi in terms of size, ranked 143rd out of 197 countries from largest to smallest. Just a little larger than its neighbor to the east, North Macedonia. For you Americans out there, Albania is about the size of Maryland. Now some history. The Albanians, or Shqiptare, their word for children of eagles, can trace their existence back around 3,000 years to the early Bronze Age. Let's talk about that children of eagles thing, because that stuck with me, and yet I had found no references to it, so I had to kind of look this up separately, because this is a part of their history. While the scholarly and linguistic or albanologist sources on the etymology of shqip, which means language, versus shqipe, it's just the same word, S-H-Q-I-P, but with an E, meaning eagle, they aren't really in alignment. Yet, the 300-year folk version is the more revered explanation for why the eagle is a symbol of Albania. It comes from an era of nation building, with the eagle being a symbol of freedom and strength. And I think in this case, resilience. In fact, the flag of Albania is a red flag with a black two-headed eagle on it. So we're going to go with the more emotionally resonant eagle story, even though, like I said, the scholarly, linguistic, albanologist versions of this differ. But I included an entire article on this that I think you'll enjoy if you're into linguistics and etymology of words. But now we're going to get back to the Vera Shqiptare, which is Albanian wine in their language, which is not called Albanian, but is called Shqip. I hope that's clear. Even their winemaking tradition, one of the oldest in the world, dates back to around 2000 BCE and the Bronze Age Illyrians, to whom Shqiptare traced their lineage. What that means is that the Illyrians of ancient were making wine before the ancient Romans. According to the OCW, a French historian named Henri Engelbert considered this area, along with some of its neighbors, quote, possibly the last European refuge of the vine after the Ice Age, end quote. In fact, grape seeds from 4,000 to 6,000 years ago have been discovered in Albania, along with evidence of wine and grape tradition in the Albanian language, quote, preserved since the earliest Proto-Indo-European period, end quote. When the Roman Empire did have its day, as with other wine regions around Europe, winemaking took flight. As we all know that Romans, they dug them some winemaking and grape growing. And as with other winemaking regions in Europe, the Ottoman Turks rolled upon the joint in 1479, not only halting vineyard expansion, but threw it into decline. I promise you, I did not wrap that rhyme on purpose. Vineyards were still mostly found in Christian-majority regions for almost 500 years. Albania finally achieved its independence in 1912 and tried to kickstart viticulture once again, but then came phylloxera in 1933. Not to mention the communist era, or how I usually describe it as the era of why we can't have nice things. Throw in a couple of world wars and what's left? plonk. Remember, with the commies, it was all about quantity and not quality. Well, by the early 1970s, Albania was finally able to sustain a couple dozen wineries and nearly 50 grape-growing regions. They were able to export wine to places like Germany, but as was the case with many areas under communism, modernization was not a priority. Thus, the wine industry suffered. Damn communism depresses the hell out of me, but then came the fall of damn communism in the 1990s, so yay, because with that came the rise of privatized vineyards and the return of Albanians with money. And perhaps a fire in their bellies that could be quenched by their own wine culture. And that brings us to wine regions. While there are no official geographically designated wine regions at the moment, production is broadly categorized into northern, central, and southern regions, no appellation rules. What you'll mostly hear is wine yappers like me divide the country into 4 zones that are distinguished by their topography and altitude. So first, we're on the beach, staring west across the Adriatic at Italy. If we do an about face, turn around, face inland, we find the first of the 4, let's say, informal zones being the coastal plains. The coastal plains, also the western lowlands, get the Mediterranean sun and sea breezes, and the Adriatic bringing that warm climate and moderation to the party. Tirana, the nation's capital, does have a good chunk of vineyards here. Then moving east, we have central Albania, which is more of a hilly region. Here we find Berat, which is known for some major wineries, a lot of vineyards in this area, as well as Elbasan and others. We have vineyards at elevations between 300 and 600 meters, averaging, let's say, about 1,500 feet on rolling hills. They get lots of sun, and this is where we're going to find the local Shesh grapes, both white and black varieties. I should also mention that Berat is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We find a lot of times in these wine regions around Europe where we have excellent vineyards, we also just happen to have UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Coincidence? I think not. Then we have the Northern Highlands. This is Shkodër country, where we find the Kalmet village and the grape of the same name, Kalmet. These are the highest vineyards. They sit around 1,000 meters or 3,280 feet. They're found inland in the foothills of the Albanian Alps, and they collect those cool breezes necessary to keep acidity levels up in grapes. It is drier here, and we can even find some ungrafted vines in northern Albania. Finally, we have southern Albania and the eastern sub-mountainous regions where we have vines and some protection from the fierce winds. But also, the highest vineyard here lies around 800 meters or just over 2,600 feet, and we have wine styles ranging from floral whites to savory reds, which finally brings us to the grapes. Albania has over 100 autochthonous grape varieties. I think the number is 107, something like that. But only about half of that, around 57, are actually cultivated for wine production. Now, you know darn well I'm not listing them, and you're welcome. But I did find a post from Andrea at the Quirky Cork who got to try some of these. And she also mentioned some data from the Center of Transfer of Agricultural Technology indicating that there are also, in addition to the autochthonous or indigenous grape varieties, 83 international grape varieties. These include things like Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay, and you've heard of them all. And by the way, shout out to the Quirky Cork. She's an expert on Turkish wine and has a couple of books out, but she's a beautiful, smart follow on Instagram. You can also always see her out on the balcony in Istanbul, see the water in the distance, and she does some beautiful staging of her wine photos, unlike anything I ever post on my Instagram, which is like, here's a glass, here's a bottle, and maybe a tasting note once in a while. But we're going to start with a couple of the red grapes that are native to Albania, starting with the Sheshi, which means black pebble. This is Albanian's most important red grape. It produces medium body wines. You can find dark fruits. I've heard anything from black cherry to blueberry to dried herbs and even a slightly earthy finish with moderate tannins. The best versions have genuine structure and they can age okay for a handful of years. I don't think they're long aging wines, but this is the red you're going to see most on restaurant wine lists throughout the country. Then we have Kalmet, which I've mentioned, grown primarily around the Shkodër in the north. Kalmet produces lighter, more aromatic reds with bright red fruit, floral notes. Think of it as Albanian's answer to Pinot Noir, lighter body, higher acidity, more finesse, not so much powerful. But in ancient times, the Romans brought this grape to Hungary where it became known as Kadarka. I think maybe the Albanians might have actually had first dibs on this grape. We also have what's called Vlash. Vlosh rhymes with squash, Vlash. This is an interesting red grape found mainly near the port city of Vlore. It has underlying flavors of, think of black olives, which reminds me of a Northern Rhone Syrah, and a touch of plum with dry, somewhat rough tannins as some of the notes I've got, possibly an acquired taste for the adventurous drinker. Sign me up. That would be one I'd want to try. And finally, the Syrine. According to Albanian vignerons, the red Syrine is the country's answer to Syrah. For the whites, we're going to start off with the Sheshi Barda, which means white pebble. We had the Sheshi Z, the black pebble, and the reds. Now we've got the Sheshi Barda, the white version. And this is going to be made in a dry, higher acidity style. Great pairing for seafood dishes, something you might see on the Mediterranean coast. We also have Pulas. It's aromatic, it's floral, it's pretty underrated, but it's used by the winery Chobo for their rare sparkling wine. Finally, we have the Dabina, and it is shared with neighboring Greece. It's going to be lighter, higher acid. It's going to have some of that fresh mountain clean air, high altitude character, if you will. I haven't had any of these, so that was what I was able to gather from other people who've got to try them or from the descriptions of the grapes on various websites that try to combine them all. This finally brings us to wine styles. We know there are straight-up reds and whites being made in Albania, but they also create rosés, typically from the aforementioned Sheshi and the Kalmet, which I mentioned earlier. They're going to be dry, they're going to have delicate notes of strawberry, some say rhubarb, light body, refreshing acidity, typical for a lot of rosés and ideal for warm Mediterranean afternoons. And when this comes out, we'll be getting ready to celebrate Rosé Day, so if you can find yourself an Albanian rosé, I would love to hear about it. They also have sparkling wines. They're less common, but I also mentioned the Chobo Winery. They are known for their sparkling wine in Berat from the Pulas grape and the Sheshi Barda that I also mentioned, the two white grapes. They offer fine bubbles, bright acidity, and citrus flavors, typical white flowers, and occasionally a hint of brioche if they're aging on the lees. They are rare, but they are worth seeking out, and Andrea got to try a couple of these, so check out her blog that I linked up for you. There's also a rich, thriving tradition of something called raki. That is not a wine. That is a grape or fruit spirit. Some would say grape mark spirit, which is similar to a grappa, or a fruit spirit by EU regulation. If it's not grapes, it's a fruit spirit. Think of something like slivovitz made with plum, because raki can also be made with plums and other fruits as well as berries. I think mulberries is one of them. At meals, raki comes before the food, sometimes before you're even seated. It comes with the food, and it comes after food. Can you have it as a sip with the morning coffee? Sure, I've had that with grappa. Not a big deal. We're not doing shots here. We're just sipping. And the culture of Albanian raki is in the vein of with joy. When you toast, you do it in the spirit of wishing the other person with whom you are toasting, and you must look them directly in the eye. You are wishing them joy. And to say cheers, you would say gazur, which really doesn't mean cheers, but it means may you be joyful. There is so much more to the Albanian raki tradition, so of course I linked up a piece from the National Albanian Register. And this is interesting also, if I have any Albanians listening out there that don't know about this, this is a very rich cultural resource for all things Albanian in the United States. It is a 501c3 dedicated to recognizing and counting Albanian diaspora in the U.S., all run by volunteers. If you are of Albanian heritage, please go check out this valuable resource and support their work. This is not an ad, it's just something I found that has helped me quite a bit. Whew, talk about a timely episode. Not only is Albania one of the most interesting countries in Europe, we've heard about it in the news for the last 2 years. First, there was a TikTok ban from their socialist prime minister, which was overturned a year later, but with better protections, supposedly. Overall, the Constitutional Court of Albania determined that the ban violated press freedom as well as freedom of expression. Then there's the long, convoluted process for EU membership. The EU has hailed Albania's accession progress as, quote, unprecedented, and, quote, with eyes on a 2027 timeline, but will probably be more between 2028 and 2030, depending on your sources. I've hooked up a crap load of them for you. And why does this matter? Wine, of course. We've alluded to the importance of EU membership before when we've run through the histories of other wine regions and what happens when they join the EU. It boosts things such as wine exports, industry advancements, EU membership means EU market access, appellations, and standards to get Albanian wine onto European wine lists. It opens up their market. I linked up a super detailed, non-political look at the timeline of Albania's quest to join the EU, dating all the way back to 2003, what it means to everything from infrastructure to banking to food safety, hospitality, healthcare, corruption, all those things. Now, the land of eagles finds itself in the news not just because of EU, not because of the former TikTok ban, but because of flamingos. That's what I said. The flamingo revolution is upon us, people. Thousands of Albanians have been protesting in Tirana against a coastal tourism complex linked to, I'm just going to say, vapidly awful people from two documented corrupt families that I don't name in my podcast. But let's just say there's an ongoing corruption investigation, supposedly, which shouldn't surprise anyone, into a multi-billion-dollar project that is building luxury resort and hotels on the uninhabited island of Sazan, which is formerly a secret communist military base, and the protected coastal area of Vouillamoz, which is a wetland home to flamingos, seals, and sea turtle nesting sites. This site lies at the mouth of the wild, free-flowing Vouillamoz River, which runs from the Pindus Mountains in Greece all the way to the Adriatic. The birds here in these lagoons have become a symbol of fierce opposition. Nope, not the eagle, but the flamingo. You'll see props in the street like cardboard flamingos, and they've actually taken the double-headed eagle on the flag and made it into like flamingos, which is really kind of fun. You'll see signs reading things like Albania is not for sale and I don't want Albania like Dubai, and these protesters have been filling the streets of Tirana for 2 weeks as of this recording. I've also linked up for your viewing pleasure the Flamingo Revolution website, because you know there is one, and right on the front page you see the double-headed flamingo made to look like the double-headed eagle. You can also see the timeline, the issues, the demands. I've also linked up a ton of reporting on it as well. Because it's not just about the wetlands, the flamingos, and the sea turtles, but this project could violate EU environmental rules and threaten Albania's efforts to join the EU, which we just talked about why joining the EU is important for the wine. So it all comes back to the wine, and what we have here are, please forgive me, children of eagles marching in the streets with cardboard flamingos, protesting the actions of turkeys. I think that's a good place to stop and have a drink. So where have we been today? Wow, from the Bronze Age, Illyrians, Romans, Ottomans, Phylloxera, communists, and now invasion from vapid billionaires, the wine in Albania looks to survive. Maybe it's stubbornness, but it's certainly character. And that's what I expect to find in a glass of Sheshizi. I respect and appreciate a ruggedly beautiful country that has kept its vines alive through 5 centuries of regimes telling it not to. And I raise my glass to a hopeful future of someday being able to enjoy these wines on a broader scale. Those are the kind of things that bring me joy. And I hope this episode has brought you a little joy. Guzuar, I am honored you have chosen, of all the other wine podcasts out there, mine this week. Thank you for sharing these ridiculous times with me in your ears, putting up with my rapping and my silly jokes, and for subscribing, which keeps this precious spot open for me in your podcast feed. You can always reach out to me via email, val@glassandsession.com, or glassandsession@proton.me, or in the socials, pick your poison, Blue Sky, Glass and Session, Vino With Val on Threads and Instagram. You'll see Glass and Session in my bio. I'm on Spoutable, Glass and Session. I'm on Substack now, still trying to figure it out, Glass and Session. I'm on Vino With Val on Pinterest and on Facebook/Glass and Session when they're not kicking me off. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Valerie Caruso, DWS, CWE, FWS, letters, numbers, wine stuff, and audiobook narrator, which reminds me you can find not only this podcast, but the latest audiobooks I've narrated on Audible. If you go to Audible and look up books narrated by Val Caruso and you would like a review copy of anything from The Gurkhas, Winston Churchill, Gaslighting for God, Introvert, any of those things, I can always send you a promo code for a free review copy. And as always, there's Glass and Session swag in my TeePublic store, linked way at the bottom of the show notes and on my website. And I thank you to those of you who are supporting this show. Glass and Session is a production and registered trademark of Vino With Val, LLC. Music is Write Your Story by Joy Stock. Website is glassandsession.com.